One of my previous videos had to do with how I turned on my old Neogeo game console for the first time in 20 years. It wouldn't reliably come on, but I was able to fix that issue. Another issue I had with it was with the game controller. I attempted to fix the controller, but that turned out to be a lot more complicated than I expected. Hi everyone. So, my Neogeo controller is not working properly. The issue being that certain directions on the D-pad would not register. I attempted to fix it by cleaning the micro switches, but having dirty contacts was not the issue. During the cleaning process, one of the solder pads just fell off the PCB. This pad helps the micro switches make electrical contact with the PCB. I did a little research on how to fix this, and I got some help on the official Neogeo thread in the Atari Age forums. There's a lot of great Neogeo information there, so you should check it out. I'll provide a link in the description. Anyway, I was suggested that I remove everything having to do with the directional pad and scrape off some of the PCB near the directions that are not working. Then, I would bridge a new contact for the micro switches. This fix is above what I'm capable of doing, and I'm not sure if it would affect how the controller is put back together if any additional spacing is created. So I decided to forget about fixing the controller, put it away, and then maybe revisit it in the future. I still had the problem of not being able to play the Neogeo because of no controller, so I decided to research alternatives. I tried searching for replacement controllers, but both the original Gamepad and arcade stick are a bit expensive. I honestly never liked the Neogeo Gamepad, and also wasn't really interested in the arcade stick. My issue with the Gamepad was its directional pad. I'd much rather prefer a standard D-pad than this analog-looking thing. And the reason I'm not interested in the arcade stick is just that I much rather play with the Gamepad. So then I tried searching to see if USB adapters exist that allow me to plug in a PC or Xbox controller into the console. I first found an adapter that lets you use a PS3 or PS4 controller. I don't have any PlayStation controllers, so I would also have to purchase one of those, and with the adapter costing $40, the price was starting to go up. I also prefer Xbox controllers anyway, and I already have one of those. I did find another adapter called the undammed USB decoder. It will allow me to plug in an Xbox or PS3 controller, but I couldn't find it in stock while creating this video. I also found adapters that allow you to connect Super NES, Genesis, and Sega Saturn controllers. But while doing all this research, I did find some people who were able to mod cheap replica Super NES controllers to work on a Neogeo. I read some articles and saw some videos, and I saw that it wasn't very difficult to do this mod. So I saw it as a fun project, so I ordered a pack of Super NES controllers and some Neogeo extension cables. So here we have the extension cables and controllers I received from Amazon. I'll go ahead and open them up to get a better look. The controller feels really light, so I'm not confident it will be a good controller. Also, their price doesn't give me much confidence either. I could have probably purchased an original Super NES controller, but it did not feel right sacrificing an original controller for this mod. I do have a Super NES to USB adapter, so let me test out the controller on something else. So I have a setup here to test out the Super NES controllers. I'm using an LCD monitor that I'm using for a bar top arcade cabinet build. Here is the Super NES controller USB adapter. I have it attached to this USB hub that in turn attaches to an FPGA board. An FPGA board is a device that can emulate other computing devices at the hardware level. I'm gonna set it to emulate a Neogeo to test out the controllers. So I'll plug in a Super NES controller and run a game. I'm now playing Magician Lord, and the controller does not feel very good. Certain directions don't register properly. Playing Samurai Showdown is even worse. The D-pad would randomly register the wrong direction at times, and it's very difficult to execute special moves. I'm still going to go ahead with the mod, but these will not be my main controllers for the Neogeo. Okay, so now back to modding the controller. These are the Neogeo extension cables. They are used to extend the length of the original Neogeo controllers. However, I'm going to use these cables to replace the ones that are on the Super NES controller. I'll accomplish this by cutting the cable and soldering the wires onto the Super NES controller circuit board. So I'll get started. I'm going to first take the controller apart. So here's the PCB. The good thing about it is that it has some contacts where I can directly solder wires to. These contacts are represented by these circles. You can see one next to each button. I also have to solder ground, and my research showed that ground is located here. So I'll continue. I'll now desolder the Super NES cable. Now it's time to prepare the extension cable so I can solder it to the gamepad. I'll cut out the end that plugs to a controller and leave the end that plugs to the console alone for now. I also need to figure out which colored cable represents each button. The way the Neogeo controller works is pretty simple. Each button and direction represents a pin on the cable. Other consoles had fewer pins than buttons, so they had to add extra circuitry to help them translate button presses for the console. Here's a diagram of what pins on the controller represent each button for the Neogeo. So now I'll take the end that I cut off and open it up. I'll compare what colored wires are connected to what pin and create a chart. This will help me determine which wire color I'm going to solder to which button on the PCB. And these are my findings. So I'll continue by exposing the wires of the extension cable. And when that's done, I'll start soldering the Neogeo cables onto the controller PCB. And here's my result with the little soldering skills that I have. Now time to put the controller back together. The extension cable is pretty thick and would prevent you from completely sealing the controller. Since I don't want to have any cables exposed, I decided to take an X-Acto knife and shave off some of the plastic on the cable so it can fit inside the controller. And that worked. Now it's time to plug in and test the controller. Okay, so it's working. But just like the test I did with the Super NES to USB adapter, it doesn't feel very good. Actually a bit worse, probably because of my soldering skills. But the horrible rubber pads that make contact with the PCB should be the biggest culprit. I can probably check to see if I can find better rubber pads, but at this point, that would be too much work for this project and would be better to get one of the adapters for the current controller. So I had done just that. I kind of knew these cheap gamepads won't be very good. I just didn't expect just how bad. So I ordered a Genesis to Neogeo adapter that will let me plug an original Genesis controller into the Neogeo. I also ordered a Retrobit controller for the Sega Genesis. These are official reissued controllers licensed by Sega. Retrobit did an excellent job in getting an authentic look and feel. But how do they play? So after getting the adapter and Retrobit controller set up, everything was so much better. I was able to easily control characters and pull off special moves in fighting games. I'll create a more detailed video on the Genesis to Neogeo adapter at a later time. So after going through all this, it might seem that it was all for nothing because I ended up not even using the controller mod. Well, one of the reasons I did this is because I find projects like this fun. And what I learned with this can also be useful if I ever come across another cheap Super NES gamepad that actually works well. Do any of you have any suggestions that is not an original Super NES pad? Also, the knowledge I gained doing the mod gave me the idea of creating a dedicated arcade stick. Even though I do prefer gamepads, creating an arcade stick just seems like a fun project. The fact that each button uses its own wire makes this a straightforward project, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Anyway, I hope you also learned something in this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and I'll speak to you next time.